And let's join the First Minister now. Good morning, First Minister. Thank you very much for coming in. You're getting very good reviews. Have you read the reviews yet in the papers?
Well, no. Politicians only read reviews when they're good ones, Isabel, so the answer obviously is yes.
Okay. If we start with then some of the specific content of your speech, First Minister, you said the days of politicians in London telling Scotland what to do and what to think are over, but if we keep the pound post-independence, actually it will be the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England telling us what to do essentially in a lot of areas of fiscal policy.
Well, not fiscal policy and monetary policy, but I made a speech actually in London at the London School of Economics a couple of weeks back, where I was outlining 6 areas of fiscal policy, of taxation policy, which would make a very substantial difference to growth in the Scottish economy within the context of a sterling zone. So my argument would be, within the context of a sterling zone across these islands, you could determination over taxation, over spending, over making Scotland more competitive could have a very powerful positive impact on growth in Scotland. Take one example would be the air passenger duty. If we could have a competitive air passenger duty, we could supply a huge boost to Scottish tourism. That would be something which we could do, part of a sterling zone, but still having determination over key areas of fiscal policy.
But can we go back to this fundamental premise? Nobody can argue any longer, given what's happening in Europe, that you can disentangle fiscal policy with monetary policy. And if what we're saying is that the Bank of England will be the lender of last resort for Scotland, it is not going to agree a fiscal policy which it thinks irresponsible. Other economists have already said, because of keeping the pound, there will be very little room for manoeuvre in fiscal policy in Scotland. Do you accept that?
Oh, no, I don't, which is why I made the speech. And nobody, interestingly enough, has attacked or criticised in any substantial measure the 6 major policy initiatives which would boost growth in the Scottish economy. But I think there's a fundamental difference, incidentally, between a sterling zone between Scotland and England, which have similar, actually identical levels of productivity, than comparing it with the euro area, where the productivity has to scale between the Ruhr Valley in Germany and the southern tip of Greece. This is totally different situations. Certainly you have to have coordination, certainly you'd have to have a stability pact of some kind, but you would still be able to have key determinations to drive the Scottish economy forward. And of course my speech yesterday had illustrations of areas where we're controlled from London, where Scottish control, where independence would make a huge difference to Scottish workers.
Yeah, but in terms of the margin that you have there, you've been talking about borrowing not exceeding 3% of GDP, and also we know that, for example, George Osborne has got a very tight fiscal regime at the moment. You would want for Scotland a looser fiscal regime in borrowing and spending. So there's obviously a contradiction there. When you say there's a pact, I'm trying to work out whose priorities would be most persuasive to the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee.
Well, 2 things. I mean, I gave the illustration that 3% of GDP in borrowing over the long term is not just it's an essential discipline that any country would have to have at any time. But secondly, let's take last year, for example. We just had the GERS figures, which have been published, which showed a 2.6 billion surplus relative to the UK between the Scottish figures and the UK figures. I mean, that's £510 for every man, woman and child in Scotland. In other words, if we'd borrowed the same as the UK, Scotland would have been £510 per person better off. That's £510 you could have invested in the economy in terms of that overall 2.6 billion. You could have reduced taxation, you could have saved for the future. You certainly could have made life in Scotland substantially better for the people of Scotland by marrying Scotland's resources to the talents and abilities of our people. So those who say these things don't make a difference, control their fiscal policy doesn't make a difference, belie the reality that it would make a huge difference to the lives of people in Scotland.
So we can look at this about reducing taxation and saving for the future in a moment on these figures, but just to clarify, you agree there would have to be a stability pact and there would have to be a pact on the borrowing?
Well, there would have to be a stability arrangement within the monetary zone, but as I've argued and set out in substantial detail, and I'll give you some other examples if you like, the fiscal independence that we would have within that position would allow you to boost growth in the Scottish economy. That is real independence in the modern world. Control of your resources, control of taxation, the ability to make your economy more competitive, and of course to make society more taxpayer.
But only to the point that the Bank of England, as lender of last resort, actually agrees your fiscal policy. It is not going to are you arguing, First Minister, it will bankroll a fiscal policy that it thinks irresponsible and is...
Isabel, that's not what the Bank of England Monetary Policy Authority does.
Well, if it's standing as lender of last resort...
Your fiscal policy is bankrolled by the taxation and the resource taxes you take in and your spending. That's determined by your Treasury. It's the same in London at the present moment. But the Bank of England determines its monetary policy, not fiscal policy. The Bank of England, of course, is independent, not just from any Scottish finance minister, it's independent from the Chancellor of the Exchequer as well. So those who argue would be giving up political control of monetary policy have conveniently forgotten that that's something that Gordon Brown did in 1997, and would be in no different position with regard to the Bank of England and monetary policy as the UK Chancellor is at the present moment. There is a big difference between the monetary framework you have and the fiscal policy initiative, the control of taxation. And anybody who actually says that not controlling taxation...
What you can borrow and what you can spend. All I'm suggesting, First Minister...
Not just that, isn't
it?
It's what you can spend on.
Yes, well, you can prioritise your spending any way you want. All I'm suggesting is there will have to be some sort of pact. You will not be able to run any kind of fiscal policy you want if it is out of step with what the Bank of England, as lender of last resort, thinks will be okay to, for example, secure its credit ratings and to secure its interest rates.
Well, I'm sorry, the Bank of England does not determine fiscal policy. The point I'm making is you'd have to have a fiscal stability pact because you do these things anyway. If it were 3% over the long term in terms of GDP, that's no more than any prudent country over the long term would have anyway. The idea that you can have a throwaway fiscal policy, whatever monetary arrangement you're in, is for the birds. Right. I am saying that control of taxation and spending is absolutely critical to boosting the Scottish economy, increasing our competitive position, and also building that fairer, more equal society that I was outlining in my speech yesterday. Can
we look to your comments then about, we know from the official figures, as you said here, that control of our own finances in Scotland, we would have been 2.6 billion better off. That's £510 for every man, woman and child in Scotland. And you've just said that you could use that to invest in the economy, to reduce borrowing and to save for the future. When we actually look at the GERS figures for 2010-11, and that's allocating 90.5% of North Sea revenues. The fiscal balance is 35.3 billion in the red. So actually, no saving, no investing, just slightly less in debt.
Well, you're quite wrong about that, incidentally. The thing that matters is what would Scotland's position have been if we'd borrowed the same as the United Kingdom. That's the comparison that matters. And what the figures show is 2.6 billion better off. In other words, we could have borrowed 2.6 billion better off, or we could have invested some of that in the economy, and capital spending would have been a very good idea.
And not paid down the debt.
It's the comparison between your relative standing with the United Kingdom. If we borrowed and spent at the same level as the United Kingdom, we'd have been 2.6 billion. We're at 2.6 billion, as you rightly say, £510 a head for every man, woman and child, that we would have had the choice to either borrow less, or invest more, or save for the future. These facts are irrefutable. That is exactly the position. Scotland is in a stronger position fiscally than the United Kingdom is at the present moment, and therefore would have far more room for economic manoeuvre than the Chancellor of the Exchequer has at the present moment.
But when do you think we will be in a position then to actually save money from North Sea oil revenues?
Well, I've seen some commentary in the press. I mean, for example, Norway started an oil fund even when it was running a fiscal deficit, and it did that presumably because it thought it was a good move to make to start the discipline of saving for the future. Obviously, you do it when fiscal circumstances allow. I'm merely saying that over the last 5 years, we would have been £8 billion, £8,000 million better off if Scotland had been running its own finances than being trapped in the UK. With that, you could have invested more, you could have taxed less if you wanted, you could have saved for the future, comparing our position currently with that of the United Kingdom. Now, I know it's inconvenient for our anti-independence opponents that these official kite-marked figures have destroyed their case, this idea that Scotland's a subsidised place. What these figures show is the subsidy has been flowing from Scotland to England over the last 5 years.
For instance, can we look at a couple of other points in your speech, not to go into them in great detail, but you said 25,000 modern apprenticeships every year, each and every one of them linked to a real job. What does that mean? Are you guaranteeing a real job?
Well, that's the important point. A modern apprenticeship in Scotland, as opposed to elsewhere in these islands, is employed. Somebody in a modern apprenticeship
for
in Scotland,
how long?
Well, they're employed in the apprenticeship, and the take-up rate and the completion rate is extremely high in Scotland.
Do they have a job at the end of it?
Well, the vast majority of people in modern apprenticeships go on to employment. That is the key factor. This is one of the great strengths of the modern apprenticeship system in Scotland. Our completion rate is high, the job retention rate is extremely high. Far better than elsewhere where modern apprenticeships are not employed.
What percentage actually get a permanent job, if we define that as a job for more than a year at the end of apprenticeship?
The completion rate, as I remember it, in terms of modern apprenticeship, is way up into the 70% and more, which is a very high completion rate indeed. I can check the figures in terms of retention in that company, but of course the key thing here is as well, when somebody gets a trade and a skill, they are able to be employed. You know, the challenge we've got with youth unemployment is people who haven't got the opportunity to get a trade and a skill or full-time education. And some of the initiatives being taken by Angela Constance, of course, are driving exactly how we can help people in that category.
First, Ms. Also, the statutory guarantee next year of over 600 hours of free nursery education for every Scottish 3- and 4-year-old and every looked-after 2-year-old. Just briefly, can you guarantee that wherever people live? Because in the past, rural areas have lost out on these initiatives.
Yeah, well, that's why we're putting it into statute in this Children's Services Bill. So we put it into statute next year, implemented in 2014, because it will be a statutory guarantee. It will apply the length and breadth for Scotland. Every single person in Scotland, every family in that position will be entitled to 608 hours of nursery care, childcare, as an allowance, as a free entitlement, a huge social advance, liberating many young parents into the workforce, helping enormously with family costs.
And you can guarantee wherever they live, they will be able to access that.
Yes, we can. That's the advantage of putting it into the law of the land.
Right. If we look at constitutional issues now, and we speculate on the scenario after the referendum 2014, the majority of people say yes to independence. Do you then stand MPs for Westminster at the next Westminster election in 2015?
Yeah, well, we'll stand MPs as long as that Scotland is governed by the Westminster Parliament. We want to be represented there. Obviously, when Scotland becomes independent, there wouldn't be any Scottish MPs in the House of Commons, whether they're SNP, Labour, or well, SNP or Labour probably. But
how long could that take then, do you think?
In terms of the independence negotiations, well, the target date, as was said, is to have the next Scottish parliamentary elections in 4 years' time, would be elections for an independent parliament, as opposed to
you think the whole legislative framework, all the treaty frameworks could be worked out in 4 years' time? Oh
yes, I do. And we've got international examples. The Czech-Slovak dissolution of their union took approximately that time scale. I think that's a very reasonable time scale to set. We should look forward to the next Scottish parliamentary elections being the elections for an independent parliament. I think that's a perfectly proper timescale.
If we look then to the 2016 Holyrood election, if during your negotiating time you have not come back to the Scottish people with another referendum or another way of testing opinion to say, this is the deal that we have worked out in these talks, these are the negotiations for independence, this is the deal we've come up with. When you get to 2016, what if the voters use that effectively as a referendum on the deal you've done? What if they don't like it and there's not a majority SNP government? What happens then?
Well, I think in the circumstances of the SNP and our allies and the people who believe in independence getting the support of the Scottish people in an independence referendum, I think it's a reasonable likelihood that the people supporting independence would be in a strong position in that first election for an independent parliament.
May not like what you negotiated.
Well, Isabel, last time we were in this exact position a year ago, if I remember correctly, you were saying to me quite rightly as a journalist, look, you're behind in the polls, you're not going to get re-elected as a minority government in the Scottish Parliament. 2 months later, we were able, with the support of the Scottish people, to become a majority government. So, I think our track record in these things is pretty impressive.
I think I might have been misquoted there, actually. But I'll check
did
the record.
Did you say we were going to? Because you must have stood alone in the Scottish press corps.
Let me look then, finally, at the comments we've had from the Labour MP Tom Watson. He says your relationship with Rupert Murdoch could be damaging to Scotland. How would you characterise your relationship with Rupert Murdoch?
Well, I'd characterise Tom Watson as the Vice Chairman of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party are totally hypocritical of this matter. But for the last 2 weeks they've been complaining that I had a column in the Sun on Sunday. Today's English Sun on Sunday has a column from Yvette Cooper, the shadow
yes,
Home
but
Secretary.
how would you describe your relationship with Rupert Murdoch?
Well, just as my relationship is with other major companies with a huge economic footprint in Scotland, a totally professional relationship. See, unlike Tom Watson and the Labour Party, I haven't changed my mind on any of these matters. Okay. I've supported the police inquiries, I've supported the Leveson inquiry, I support that wider inquiry into malpractice across the press, Operation Motorman revealed, you know, the 900 potential illegalities of the Daily Mail, which were noted by the Information Commission. I've never quite understood why these haven't been properly investigated. I've supported all of these things consistently and will continue to do so. Just before we leave it then, Professor, let me just ask you, you met Rupert Murdoch in Edinburgh on Wednesday the 29th of February. The day before that, the Leveson inquiry heard some of the most shocking allegations made against News of the World by a policewoman who said the paper had acted to pervert the course of justice and intimidate police officers in a murder inquiry. The next day you took a meeting with Rupert Murdoch. You say it's for you have to protect the business interests of Scotland. Why shouldn't that meeting have been taken by someone on your business team and not Scotland's First Minister? Well, I've supported the police inquiries that's into News International. I supported the Leveson inquiry. I've done that north and south of the border. As soon as I had a meeting with Rupert Murdoch, I released publicly the meeting had taken place. I don't have it in secret like the Labour government used to do. Everything was perfectly proper and above board. I did it from a consistent position that I put forward, and also, of course, recognising that companies have major footprints in Scotland. Okay. See, the Labour Party position seems to be that it's wrong for me to openly meet News International when they have said that they're going to change their practices, change their ways. But it was okay for them to meet News International when they were fully aware of malpractice and to do it in secret all these years ago. The only thing consistent about the Labour Party's attitude to this has been their consistent hypocrisy. Alex Salmond, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you.